This is House Planning Help episode 22. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and if you want to find out about self-building or renovating, then you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that explores what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to be in an energy-efficient home by the time I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, we're looking at straw bale building. What's it all about? How does it differ from building with other materials? Is it cheaper? Is it safe? And lots more. My guest is Mark Saich. But you may be saying to yourself, Ben, you're looking very tan today. I thought you were thinking that, and that's because I've just got back from holiday in Mexico. My brother got married out there, and it was one of those rare opportunities to get the family together, and it's been a very cold start to the year in the UK, so it's just nice. It's nice to see the sunshine again, but also I find it really difficult these days to go anywhere without looking around me and thinking, the buildings here, and having a closer look. How they do them? And we were staying in some quite nice accommodation, but because the climate's very different, single pane glass in the windows, yet they're still using energy in the aircon, and often the fans. Some of the rooms, when we moved to different places, they were very dark and dingy, so you had to have all the lights on, and then the ventilation was poor. And I did read a story this week about Mexico getting its first passive house, and I'd love to see how that differs and what the locals would make of that in this different climate, but being a much more energy efficient building. But that was one thing. The other thing, I met some people who are involved in the shale gas business in North America. Now, I have quite a bad impression of shale gas, and it's almost a gut instinct that it's not a good idea, but it was the perfect opportunity to raise my objections if I knew what I was talking about. But I don't know enough on it. That didn't stop me. I had a go, and just chatting. I don't think climate change really is taken that seriously. That's what's odd, and they say a very small amount of what they do results in CO2. I think it was about 2% was the figure that was quoted to me. But another side that is almost difficult, and I think this has been raised in some of the podcasts that we've done before, that they focus, all of these fossil fuel industries, their focus is on finding and extracting energy. And no one seems to address the concern when I was having this chat about how are you going to make sure you get this energy out of the ground? How are you going to make sure that it goes as far as possible? Well, that's not really our job, is it? We get it out of the ground. You do the rest of it. So it's really difficult if people keep on extracting the fossil fuels out of the ground and their focus is not on energy efficiency. I can't see a situation where they're going to stop. I always think back to the episode that we did with Dr. Brenda Boardman from the Environmental Change Institute. If you haven't heard that one, it's houseplanninghelp.com/11. But she told us that it's estimated that about a quarter of the fossil fuels left in the ground could never be used, or we would face the major problems, the sea level rises and a lot of mass relocation and damage all around the world. But yet you look at this situation here and you wonder, it's going to take a strong leader, isn't it, to say, no, actually, there's no access to what's in the ground now. We're going to have to think of other ways of doing it. And even then, if one country did that, or a handful of countries, and the rest don't join in, then you undermine it, don't you? Because you've got cheap energy coming from somewhere else, so the focus isn't on energy efficiency. And I keep thinking that we have this really difficult situation. We want to find a catalyst, really, don't we? So we can bypass all that. And I do love this Victor Hugo quote from many years ago about nothing is stronger than an idea whose time has come. And I think a lot of people have grasped the fact that things have to change, but not everyone. And I don't know what that final change is that everyone's going to get this idea and that we'll all change. And hopefully it won't be too far down the road. And just to conclude this, I did read something on holiday, great holiday reading, called The Collapse of Western Civilization. I told you it was good holiday reading. And this is A View of the Future by Naomi Oreskes, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, and Eric M. Conway. Now, Naomi Oreskes is a professor of history and science studies at the University of California, San Diego, and Eric M. Conway is a historian of science and technology based in Pasadena, California. What's clever about this is that they use all of the facts of history up until now into this short story, and then blend that with their vision of what the future might be. knowing what humanity is like, thinking how things could go, industry, lobbyists. And it's fascinating reading. It's not too long either. It's about 15 pages. So I've decided to put a link to that in today's show notes. I think you'll find it very interesting reading. So you'll find that at houseplanninghelp.com/22. And I'd love any comments that you have in today's show notes. Let's get into the interview then. Mark Saich from Green Building Solutions is my guest as we look at straw bale building. I started by asking him for an overview of his career in sustainable building.
Well, I've been in construction for about 25 years as carpenter, joiner, building control, environmental health. And my interests in construction and concern about the way we were building, about waste, about embodied energy with the materials we use, etc., led me to explore the use of various other materials. And straw bale building I stumbled across on the internet, and that really sort of caught my interest. And this was around 2000, I suppose. And from then I've been looking into it more and more. And then over the years I've got involved in projects. And now for several years now have been assisting other people to build and running training courses.
When I first found out about straw bale building, there was a part of me that thought, oh, this is a bit weird. Is it something that has been around for a long time?
Yeah, it's been around since late 1800s, early 1900s in Nebraska in the US. And early settlers built houses using straw bales because there weren't many other materials around at the time.
If we're starting out, what do we need to know about straw bale building?
Well, there's a few issues, I suppose, that you need to consider. One is the quality of the bales. Although they are essentially regular bales that you will see in a farmer's field, the ones that you build with do need to be a good quality. So they need to be nice and tight, they need to be reasonably even sized, and just general good quality, dry, vermin, seed-free, etc., that kind of thing.
How do you know that it is good quality? If I were looking at it compared to you, you know what you're looking for. Tell me, what do I need to see?
Well, if a bale is damp, it will smell damp. It will probably look damp as well. It will be darker. It might even be blackening. It will be much heavier than a usual bale. Obviously, you kind of need experience of a dry bale to know whether you're holding a heavy bale. But a degree of common sense and asking sensible questions of the farmer or engaging the services of someone who's experienced in straw bale construction.
So when we put down the foundations, presumably that's just standard, is it? And at what stage do we start building with bales?
Well, I suppose we should take a step back here, really, because there's two main types of straw bale construction. One is called a load bearing, and this is essentially where you build out of bales just like you would if you were laying bricks. So those would normally be built on a plinth wall on a strip foundation. Now, you may be able to build a low impact foundation with less concrete, but really this comes down to the ground conditions and the size and design of your building, but there is potential for that. So a strip foundation, probably a cavity wall up to about 6 or 8 inches above ground level, which is about the usual place of a damp-proof course in a normal masonry house or indeed a timber frame house. And then from there, you build what we call a ladder, which is in timber framing talk is the sole plate, and that's fixed to the plinth wall. And then you stack the bales in what we call running course, which is like bricks.
And there's definitely something in me that gets concerned about moisture getting into the bales. So maybe we could look at that. There are enough straw bale buildings around that obviously it's not a problem, but how do you protect it against the moisture? You're saying, first of all, that damp-proof course at the bottom, which is fair enough, but have there been cases of where the moisture has got in?
And there's certainly, I'm sure there are buildings which haven't been detailed or built properly and have suffered. Over the years, I have had people come back to me and talk about having mushrooms growing and black mould on their unfinished build. But the problems weren't inherent with building with straw. It was their inappropriate detailing and temporary weather protection during the build. So the sources of moisture for a straw bale building, or any building, in fact, this is an important thing to think about. A lot of the rules and things that we need to address in a straw bale building are actually the same issues whether you build out of brick, block, timber, cob, rammed earth, or cheese. It's the same principles. Get it off the ground and stop rising damp coming up into the building, and that's where you have your damp proof course. Essentially, in a straw bale building, that damp proof course is protecting the timber ladder as much as anything. The other source of moisture is rain, and we keep rain off buildings by having either impermeable or semi-impermeable materials. So your brick house, it's the bricks and mortar that do it. In a timber frame house, it's often timber cladding, sort of shiplap cladding, that kind of thing, or render. And in straw, you can use the timber cladding or the render. So the lime-based render will hold the rain off, but what it will do is allow any moisture that's built up in the wall will basically sweat out. The other source of moisture in a building is everything that we breathe out, the moisture from cooking, from drying clothes, and that's got to go somewhere. So we deal with that in buildings through ventilation, so opening windows, sometimes the trickle vents in windows, and mechanical extract fans or whole house ventilation systems. Another technique, not instead of that, but to assist in that whole process, is to use materials which we call breathable. And the term breathable, what that actually means is it's the ability of materials to take up and release moisture without adversely affecting the longevity of those materials. So materials like timber, sheep's wool, wood fibre, wood, lime plaster, and straw bales are all what we call breathable materials, and therefore can take up some moisture and allow it to migrate to the outside or to kind of re-evaporate back into the building without causing rot of the structure.
When we're dealing with these very natural products, how good is a straw bale, for example, as an insulator? Because we're very interested about the energy efficiency at the end of this. So it's not just that we're using natural, low-embodied energy materials, but also the other side. Can you have both, I suppose?
The energy in use, absolutely. Straw bales are excellent insulators. There depends on the type of straw, the density of the straw, and the quality of the build. But as an average, you can sort of assume, I suppose, straw bales will have what's called a U value of 0.15 watts per metre squared. So that's the rate of heat loss for every square metre of wall. Now, to put that in context, if you build an extension under the current Part L, then the heat loss in your wall should be no worse than 0.28 watts per metre squared. So roughly, a straw bale wall is half the heat loss of a building regs compliant wall. To further, as another example to put it in context, if you're designing to the passive house standard, which are buildings that need very little heat input to maintain a level of thermal comfort, the kind of starting point for U values of walls, floors and roof is 0.15. So you can see it is a very energy efficient material.
When you model with PHPP, is there an issue that you don't know that straw the whole way across is going to be the same U value, that there's some fluctuation, or does that just even out?
I would say it evens out. I'm not actually a passive house consultant. I am aware of the standard and the methodology, and I know that the certifiers of the passive house standard are much pickier about the U values in construction. But that U value of 0.15, I would say, is a safe average for the entire wall. There certainly are people claiming it's as good as 0.12. I think it's the Bale House, which is the mod sale system. I think they claim 0.12. To know exactly, you've got to test do test wall panels on known density and known type of straw, which is why I kind of stick with the 0.15. It's a safe. If you do a U value calculation on generic values for straw, you get a similar U value. When you consider other materials that you know must perform about the same, you still end up with a similar U value. So it's kind of like the value I use just to be safe, knowing that it's probably better.
Is there a situation where straw bales are naturally more likely to be chosen, or can it be used everywhere so long as you have the space? Because it's slightly wider, isn't it?
Well, I suppose the main issue, yes, is space. You're typically with a rendered and plastered, or rendered, plastered and clad wall, you're going to have walls that are about 500 millimetres thick, half a metre, which a lot of people will think, oh, that's rather thick. But going to passive house standards and current building regs for new buildings, and knowing where the building regs are going, we're going to have walls of at least 400 thick anyway. So it's not that much thicker. But yes, there will be instances, certain in a dense development in a city, you may not want to sacrifice the space, and therefore you may go for a petrochemical insulant to get the performance that you want. But other than that, straw bale walls are used in a whole range of different types of buildings and different sizes of buildings. And those who want a natural building with low embodied energy and high energy efficiency are not put off by that extra 4 inches of wall thickness.
And there are no constraints as you design as well. You can have anything.
Pretty much, yes. I mean, like with any building, there's usually a solution to get something close to what the client wants. But there are, like with brickwork, like with timberwork, there are sort of rules of thumb that you want to follow. So sort of ensuring that you've got a universally distributed load all the way round, which means that the roof loads, snow loads, floor loads are distributed across all the walls. So you haven't got point loads and therefore differential settlement within your building, and having a decent return on corners. So a decent reveal, I suppose you would call it. Things like that. And then, like I said earlier, about being above the damp proof course and having decent overhang on the roof. They say treat it like a baby, keep its bum dry and give it a good wide brim hat, and then you should be fine.
When these buildings go up, you've mentioned a few times about how to even out the load, but do you have to have some other structure at a point if you wanted to build quite a high building? Well,
actually, I suppose this kind of takes us back a few questions ago. You talked about foundations, and we talked about a load-bearing structure. What I didn't mention was the other type of building, which is the non-load-bearing, which essentially is a framed building with straw bale in between. So taking both of those methods, on the load-bearing, you can do single or double story. There are some examples of 3-story. Often, though, the third story is kind of a half story. So it's got a low eave. So it's a bit like, like in a chalet bungalow or something like that. And that reduces some of the risk and some of the height of the straw. But it also makes better use of materials because you're occupying half a roof space. If you want to go seriously multi-story, if you're going to go beyond that, then I would suggest probably a frame is the most appropriate, and then infill in panels as you go, and then there's no limit. If you've got a frame, your engineer's proved will stand up, you can go as high as you like. The Empire State Building.
Do these buildings hold their value, or are people sometimes nervous because, I prefer something that's got concrete or is built brick and block?
I'm not sure on the answer to that. Although there are quite a few straw bale buildings in the UK and across the world, I don't know how many of them actually been resold. I think I would suggest that particularly on houses, people who've built their own straw bale houses have found their dream plot, they built their dream house, and they keep with it. But as for sort of value and to be able to resell it, one of the concerns is obviously is to get a mortgage. Now, generally, you should be able to get a mortgage on any building as long as it is structurally sound. And if the building you have built has been approved, inspected and signed off by building control, you shouldn't have a problem. Some mortgage companies insist on a building warranty, particularly for new buildings, and you can get building warranties from a number of warranty companies as long as it's been designed, approved, built properly and signed off. So, and also I think it's Triodos and the Ecology Building Society, I believe, will both lend you money at a preferential rate if you build to a good eco standard.
Is it cheaper overall than if we were going to take some other approach? It seems like it should be.
It certainly has the potential of being cheaper. One of the things about changing any technology or trying to build, say, an eco house, if you bolt on features to try and make it an eco house, or if you just transpose one material for another, then it may cost more to build either in straw or to have eco tech built onto a building. But if you take a step back and design your building from scratch with good environmental considerations and with your chosen material, straw in our case today, then it does have the potential to be cheaper. But the things that affect price, the walls, the cost of the walls of a house are only approximately 15 to 20% of the total build cost. So from that point of view, if you just say, well, here's my plans of a brick and block house, but I want straw instead of brick and block, then the walls might be half the price, but it's half of 15%, so it's not going to make a big impact. But if you design the house to use straw and maybe make your own clay plaster, if you use reclaimed materials, if you're doing it DIY, if you build the size to the size you need rather than your greeds, then it does have the potential to be much cheaper to build. But also, of course, with that thermal performance, if you have the same thermal performance in your floor and your roof, and you have high performance windows pointing to benefit from solar gain, etc., if you have high efficiency heating and lighting and hot water systems, then you've got the potential of having a cheaper house, which will be incredibly cheap to run for the life of that building.
Is there any other aspect that I haven't brought up that is worth mentioning?
I think one bit of advice I always give to people is straw bale definitely lends itself to a DIY build. That's without doubt. It's friendly, it's fun, and it ticks all the environmental boxes and all of that. But what I would suggest is that it ought to be a guided DIY. So I would always recommend that you engage the services of someone who understands how to design buildings with straw, and ideally someone with practical experience of doing it, because there's lots of little tricks about splitting bales and forming the junctions with windows and things like that. And we still want to make sure that it's fireproof and vermin proof and airtight and all of those things. And it's easy, if you don't have experience, to sort of race ahead and go, well, it looks simple, it looks quick, I'll do it. And unfortunately, you won't get the full potential out of your building, both in energy terms and longevity.
What is the best way to learn about this?
Well, definitely sign up for a workshop from somebody with lots of experience. I run courses in East Kent, and there are other very experienced people in other places around the country.
Well, Mark, we've had some fantastic information today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To access the show notes for this episode, head to houseplanninghelp.com/22. Whichever episode it is, it's always the same way. houseplanninghelp.com/the number of the episode, and you'll go straight to the show notes for that particular episode. Also, at the bottom of the page, you can leave a comment. For this one, if you have a question, we'll try and drag Mark back to answer that. We've got a link to his website too. His company is Green Building Solutions. Before I go, I just wanted to read out some of our iTunes reviews. Thank you to everyone who's done this. It's fantastic, but let's read a few of them. Orinoco3 says, for anyone interested in passive house and green home building in general, this podcast is excellent and very well produced. The interviews are fascinating, and overall it has become one of my favourite podcasts. Dean Phil says covers a wide range of eco topics, really good to listen to. PL Wood says really interesting podcast providing food for thought. The interviews really help to put house building and energy efficiency in their broadest context, both for new builds and how we treat our existing buildings. I look forward to hearing more. So those comments are brilliant, and you know that I love producing this content and I want to do so much more. I have video ideas. Hopefully one day we can make some programs for TV as well. But running ahead of myself there a little bit. What these do, it's not just about massaging my ego. It really is a positive thing on iTunes that if you give us a 5-star review, it ranks us higher. So hopefully that means that more people can access this. And this is important information that we're getting from our guests. So I hope that you can help us out with one of those reviews. If not, then word of mouth. It works just as well. It's worked for centuries. It's going to continue to work. So just tell a friend about what we're doing on the podcast, and hopefully we can build up our community. Next time on the podcast from houseplanninghelp.com, it's a client case study. I chat to Kingsley Barraclough, whose new house was constructed using structural insulated panels, SIPs. We'll find out what that's all about in the next session. Until then, take care.